the biography, the brief biography of the doctor, of the professor, but I'm going to also to read it out loud. Professor Miriam Cooke is Braxton Craven Professor Emerita of Arab Cultures at Duke University. She has been a visiting professor in Tunisia, Romania, Indonesia, Qatar, and Istanbul. She serves on several national and international advisory boards, including academic journals and institutions. She's actually also a member of our editorial board. Her writings have focused on the intersection of gender and war in modern Arabic literature, Arab women's writers' constructions of Islamic feminism, contemporary Syrian and Khaliji cultures, and global Muslim networks. In addition to co-editing 5 volumes, she is the author of several monographs that include The Anatomy of an Egyptian Intellectual, Yahya Haqqi, 1984, War's Other Voices, Women Writers on the Lebanese Civil War, 1987, Women and the War Story, 97, Women Claim Islam, 2001, Dissident Syria, 2007, and Nazira Zainuddin, a pioneer of Islamic feminism, 2010, Tribal Modern, Branding New Nations in the Gulf, or the Arab Gulf, 2014, and Dancing in Damascus, Creativity, Resilience, and the Syrian Revolution in 2017. She has also published a novel called Hayati, My Life, in the year 2000. Several books and articles have been translated into Arabic, Chinese, Dutch, and German. It is my honor and delight to introduce Professor Miriam Cooke to you, as she is going to talk about Nawal Saadawi under the title Celebrating Arab Women. I'm sorry, I'm reading the name of our conference rather than your own paper. Nawal Saadawi, activist, writer, and physician. Please welcome with me Professor Cooke. All right.
Oh, goodness. I've been to a number of these Zoom conferences and I've never heard clapping, so you're ahead with the technology.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you all for inviting me, and I am delighted to have the opportunity to pay tribute to our wonderful friend and role model, Nawal Saadawi. We live in one world under patriarchal capitalism, she said in 2014 at a conference in Beijing. We live in one world under patriarchal capitalism. I am opposed to anything that divides us. And I think we have here a lesson, particularly for us here in America, that is so radically divided today. So we need to be inspired by Nawal. The differences, she continues, between people and cultures that literature erases, theory generalizes and abstracts. And let me mention here quickly that the title that I gave you months ago for this talk, I think I would have, had I sent it to you 2 weeks ago, I would have said that the talk is actually about theorizing the imagination and imagining theory. So this is how Nawal Saadawi articulated her personal philosophy and life choices during a September 2014 meeting with Chinese women writers that we both attended at Beijing Normal University. Whereas theory distances the object of study, Nawal argued, the imaginary brings the object close in order to deal with the particular individual in her daily struggles, joys, and challenges. And let me quickly say here that I wrote Saadawi, but because I think she is a friend to all of us, I prefer the intimate Nawal. So I hope you don't think that I'm being disrespectful. I'm indicating my tenderness towards this wonderful woman. I write what I lived in my village, Kafr Tahla. Saadawi elaborated in that same event, and she went on, when with a sincere intent, a writer dives deep into their reality, the story will become universal. Theory loses the particularity that is, ironically, at the heart of the universal. Diving deep into her individual reality means returning again and again to her birthplace in a village by the Nile during intervals between traveling the globe in airplanes. For Saadawi, for Nawal, creativity brings body, mind, and spirit together. And I quote, when you're creative, when you're writing, you don't feel limited because your imagination can transcend anything. Today, I will explore Nawal's life and writings to show that although she marks a separation between theory and creativity, and she often complained about theorists, I see in her work and in whatever she said, I see that they are in fact interconnected in all that she does. Two sides of the same coin, theorizing lived experience is inseparable from the realm of the imaginary, since each feeds and enriches the other. Many of her literary works were, in fact, written in tandem with a scholarly study informed by either a medical or a religious or a geopolitical research project in which she was engaged at the time of writing a novel or a short story. Her literary projects emerge reciprocally, so I think it's important to think about it going back and forth. So her literary projects emerge reciprocally with her work as a doctor or a self-taught scholar of religions, especially the Abrahamic religions, or a human rights advocate. Medicine, fiction, and activism intertwine in all that she does, in her writings and in what she says. Nawal was born in 1931 in Kafr Tahla, a poor village on the banks of the Nile. Like all village girls, she was considered nubile before puberty. And when she was 11, suitors began to knock at the door. The young Nawal knew, at least from the perspective of an older woman, she says that she knew when she was 11, she knew that she had to escape the fate of her cousin Fatima, whom I met during a visit to Kafr Tahla a few years ago. So her fate would have been Fatima's, who at 14 married and spent the rest of her life in the village, devoted to family and fields. In 1943, the 12-year-old girl got on a train, headed for the capital, where she moved in with an aunt. 12 years later, in 1955, when she was 24, she graduated from Cairo University Medical School and went on to become director of public health and ultimately a world-famous writer and human rights activist. Although she did leave the village on the Nile, Kafr Tahla stayed with her as a source of inspiration and a moral compass. It appears in harrowing novels like God Dies by the Nile that she published in 1974, where peasant women are relentlessly policed for violations of stringent codes of village honor. They're raped and their genitals are cut. To give birth, they leave the field briefly, deliver themselves, and return to their furrow, baby strapped to the back. How did her theorizing data from medical, social, or political research accompany a creative project? Let's consider one of her first works of creative nonfiction, Memoirs of a Woman Doctor, Mudhakirat Tabiba. It came out in 1958 while she was practicing medicine near Kafr Takhla. The product of 3 years of psychiatric work, this early attempt at crafting creative nonfiction evokes the impoverished state of her women patients. Presenting her clinical experience in literary form allowed Nawal to tell a particular story that universalized the condition in which Egyptian women lived, subjected to harsh gender codes and the devastating outcome of decades of British colonial rule. Very important that in everything that she writes about Egypt, she insists this is not just Egypt, this is universal. During the following decade, while she was still practicing medicine, she published only one novel, Searching, Al-Ghaib. Published in 1968, it tells the story of Fuada, a chemist whiling her life away in the Ministry of Biochemistry. Mirroring Nawal's disillusionment with her profession, both as a doctor and at the Ministry of Health, the novel presents a cast of unattractive male officials and the women like her who cope with them. These unattractive men appear, as many of you know, again and again in her writings. So the turning point came in 1972 when she published Women and Sex, her analysis and condemnation of the injustices Egyptian women suffer, notably FGM, female genital mutilation. This scholarly exposition of the failure of the state to provide medical services to its most needy citizens caused a scandal, and she was dismissed from her position as editor-in-chief of Health magazine and as director of health education in Egypt. The official end of her medical career launched her full-time into the world of literature and political activism. Even before her dismissal in 1972, Nawal had entertained serious doubts about her medical career. In conversation with me over the years, she often repeated her conviction that her writings, and she would use that term, healed more people, especially women, than her clinical work ever could. With one novel, she said, often, she could reach thousands of girls, actually tens of thousands of girls and women whose bodies and minds she would have had to treat individually and over extended periods. And even then, she would not have known if these patients were better off for the treatment. With a novel, the cure was quicker, more effective, and more widespread. Woman at Point Zero. Do you see? Can you see the top?
Yes.
You can. Okay, good. امرأة عند نقطة صفر in 1975 proved her point about the effectiveness of writing. The novel was an immediate success. The night before her execution for murder, a prostitute named Firdaus, or Paradise, tells a psychiatrist of her seriatim sexual exploitation at the hands of those she had trusted, especially men in her family. Like so many women around the world whom sexual abuse drives to murder, Firdaus kills her pimp. At a time when incest was not generally acknowledged, or not acknowledged at all, in fact, in the 70s. The novel indicted all men, not only Firdausi's male relatives, who feel entitled to abuse girl relatives. So in a way, like Betty Friedan's 1950s, A Sickness Without a Name, the revelation of the trauma of incest named a disease so many girls had suffered without understanding what it was. Like Memoirs of a Woman Doctor, this novel was intertwined with medical research she had been conducting at Qanatir Women's Prison in 1974. There, she had interviewed over 20 women in the prison's mental clinic, including a woman called Firdaus. So, is it a novel or... And do we make that distinction between a novel and nonfiction? So she'd interviewed these women, including Firdaus, and she published the data in a book entitled Al-Mar'a wal-Sira' al-Nafsi, or Women and Neurosis in Egypt. So Woman at Point Zero has been adapted several times to the stage, and recently in London to opera. And this is a still from the opera that was performed, I think, in 2018. So the composing, of these two books, so the novel and the psychiatric study, exemplifies Nawal's commitment to analysis and intuition. Analysis for her works with numerous separate facts and elements. Intuition grasps the inexpressible self, the subject of creative writing that escapes the empiricists. It is worth noting that she wrote the novel before completing the psychological study. She passed from intuition, characteristic of the creation of literary figures, to ethnographic analysis of several women's narratives of abuse and violence. The psychological study is virtually unknown, ironically, in contrast, of course, with Woman at Point Zero. The difference between these two texts appears in the passionate portrayal of a single individual whose traumas stay with the reader, and I'm sure those of you who have read it still remember it vividly, stay with the reader long after closing the book, as opposed to the cold enumeration of symptoms. Firdaus is the product of Saadawi's, Nawal's ability to place herself, but also the reader, directly by an effort of intuition in the concrete flowing of duration. This duration is a sense of continuity inherent in individual existence that cannot be analyzed, but only intuited. And from that intuition, then comes analysis. Concise and raw, the novel, Woman at Point Zero, hit a nerve. And with its translation into English in 1983, Nawal was launched as an international feminist writer. The messages from around the world after its translation into over 30 languages, and the fact that the novel has become required reading in women's studies courses more than justified her decision to exchange her scalpel for a pen. Nawal's literary prominence gave her a public voice that she used to decry injustice in Egypt and to attack the Islamist draconian policing of women's appearance and behavior in public space. During the 1980s, not only Egypt, but also other Muslim majority countries witnessed the emergence of political Islam. Ayatollah Khomeini's 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran presaged the Islamists' growing influence. Ironically, like the Islamists she critiqued, al-Saadawi opposed President Anwar Sadat and his policies at home against the Islamists. And at the same time, she critiqued his policies abroad, notably, of course, the 1978 Camp David Accords with Israel. Here we have an example of the multiple critique that characterizes everything that she writes. She will not fall into contradiction. In 1981, the Sadat regime imprisoned al-Saadawi. A year later, the Muslim Brothers' long-term opposition to Sadat culminated in his assassination. After Hosni Mubarak assumed power, Nawal was released. In her 1985 memoirs from the women's prison, Mudhakirat fi Sijn al-Nisa, she describes the emotional roller coaster of prison, swinging between grief and joy. Love for loathing in the cell she shared with Islamist women, sternly covered even though they were with women only. The Islamists might have been the enemy of her enemy Sadat, but that did not make them her friends. She turned her voice and pen to their iniquities. Soon after her release, while writing her prison memoir, she founded the Arab Women's Solidarity Association, AWSA, the first independent feminist organization in Egypt that soon developed a parallel international association. Nawal had two mottos for AWSA. The veil shrouds the mind. And secondly, women's bodies are not shameful until they're veiled. She called for joint action against the growing intolerance of men, especially those who were oppressing women in the name of Islam. She invited Arab women from all 22 Arab countries to share their stories and strategies, empowering them to contest political parties that used Islam as a front for their grab for power. In 1991, she led AWSA International's protest against the Gulf War. Mubarak's men closed AWSA along with its magazine, Noor. Even before mobilizing international action against the president and also his enemies, the Islamists, analyzing their power and danger in newspaper articles and in her speeches at home and abroad, she was writing a novel that lyrically linked her twin struggles against the state and Muslim extremists. Suqut al-Imam, Fall of the Imam in 1987, deals with the hypocrisy of faux Muslims who seem to be opposing secular regimes, but are, in fact, in cahoots with them. The novel indicts Islamic and secular male authorities who rape, exploit, and punish women for crimes these men have committed. The heroine, Bint Allah, is the illegitimate daughter of a religious leader who had raped her mother and now wants to kill this emblem of his sin. She's called Bint Allah, a concept deemed heretical, yet the only possible name for a girl in a country where mothers cannot give their children their name. The circular narrative keeps returning to Bint Allah, running from her father and his agents. Almost liturgical in its formulaic repetitions, the novel takes readers through an increasing crescendo of fear and loathing. Nawal distilled the cruelty and hypocrisy of religious leaders in her creation of the Imam, even while fighting these same leaders in her association and in newspaper articles. Never afraid of controversy, she put herself in Bint Allah's mind and heart and body, turning around in terror as the Imam's men chased her in life and in her dreams. Intuitively, she had begun her campaign against the erasure of her mother's name, and she would later pursue in the law courts. Suqut al-Imam infuriated the Islamists who recognize themselves in this fictional story. They put her on their death list. Far from being cowed into silence, she was provoked into publishing an even more trenchantly critical novel entitled The Innocence of the Devil in 92. Her only concession to her nervous publisher was not to use the title Barak Iblis, that she later insisted on for the English translation, but to name it Ganat Iblis. Again, Ganat, like Firdaus, meaning paradise. So in the interaction among the patients in this mental prison, psychiatric ward, and the patients, one patient imagines himself to be God, and the other imagines himself to be Iblis. The novel promoted Nawal to #1 on the Islamist death list. Some self-appointed judges had staged a mock heresy trial that they published in late 92. Nawal Saadawi in the dock, Nawal Saadawi fi qafas al-ittiham. This book was quickly and cheaply distributed in major Egyptian cities. Actually, I bought my copy for about the equivalent of a quarter of a dollar from a street vendor. It was on a blanket on the sidewalk. Mimicking Ayatollah Khomeini's 1989 fatwa against Salman Rushdie for heretical passages in his 1988 Satanic Verses, their open call to punish and kill a writer for what they called heresy endangered her life. And so the government sent guards, they said, to protect her, but she had those same guards guarding her when she was in prison. So she got in touch with me. And in January 1993, I had a wonderful dean at the time who arranged for her and her husband, Sharif Haddata, to come to Duke. It was the first time she had taught in a university, and it was during her 4 years in Durham, North Carolina, that Nawal theorized the connections between dissidents, women, and creativity in the classroom, but then also in her literary autobiography that she wrote here. So other attempts at writing her life had turned into novels as she realized that she was exposing herself and those close to her to a scrutiny she was not yet prepared to endure. However, in this exile, daughter of ISIS, Awraqi Hayati, never veered from the autobiographical pact. She said it was only when she was away from Egypt that she really felt that she could write openly about her life. So she writes of the coming of age of a feminist who already as a child knew that God is the God of men and that he approves of female genital mutilation. Why otherwise would women invoke him while they cut and bury the clitoris? Her God, who is also her grandmother's God of justice, comes to her once in a vision when she is a child, but with time, she loses him. Religious men undermined her spiritual life. They betrayed, she writes, the Quran. They made her hate religion. Cutting through the intervening years, she touched the child she thought she had lost. And I quote, "Anger had never stopped accumulating in me since the day I was born. I don't know how the child in me stayed alive. Somehow, and probably through writing, the child rebelling in the 65-year-old woman had survived to prevent her from the compromise in what had become a lifelong struggle for justice." In contrast with her academic and fictional writing, the narrator in Awraqi Hayati is surprisingly vulnerable. When she had her first menses, she was afraid that people would know that her body was in a state of shame. She narrates her genital cutting at her mother's hands and the shock of betrayal by the women she had loved. She laments social disapproval of expressions of affection that inhibit mothers from openly expressing love for their children, even if this maternal love burns like a flame. Long after her mother dies, her longing for the tenderness of her touch aches on the page. Throughout the autobiography, and usually after describing a tender moment, the memory of her mother's hand on her child's face returns. In a world of repressed love, women become cruel to each other. It was a cruelty that had grown in them through suppression, the steam held back under pressure that their bodies were filled with to bursting point. It was a black cruelty under a smooth skin from which the hair had been ripped off to leave it with the smoothness of a snake. Imagery turns repressed emotions into dangerous animals. Contradictions reveal the ambivalence in the text and, of course, in her life. Indeed, in all of our lives. She loved school, and then she hated it. It represented freedom and a future, but then also a torment. At Nabawiya Musa Secondary School in Abbasiyya, she could not stand the school's headmistress and namesake, Nabawiya Musa, who, of course, as you all know, in the 1920s had pioneered Egyptian feminism and women's education. And she says, for me, Nabawiya Musa was never a pioneer or a model. She was like a German headmistress under Hitler, a French headmistress in schools run by nuns. And she hated the girls. When our eyes met, I could read the hate in her eye, in her look. Read hate for the self she carried around in her black shroud. School under her had become for me like a funeral where everything was the color of mourning, mourning with a U. The child's hatred did not diminish in the memory of the 65-year-old woman who might have been expected to recognize the courage and daring of this terribly disappointed woman. Nawal does not write of a feminist awakening as a deliberate process that can be followed, because, of course, for none of us, this is a deliberate process. She weaves stories into the stream of days, and she uses the term ayam, Arabic for days, but also for battles. And for those of you who know Taha Hussein's ayam and hayati, ayam, al-ayam, that's the meaning of days, is battles. Writing became a weapon with which to fight the system. The written word for me became an act of rebellion against injustice, exercised in the name of religion or morals or love. Creativity in life and writing mirrored each other in the struggle to seize the rights due to her as a woman. The autobiography, Awraqi Hayati, ends as it began, with the intensity and passion of the dreaming child who has her life ahead of her and who relishes the challenge of writing her dreams into stories. The literary form reflected and developed her feminist thinking. Autobiography is more real, more true than fiction, more creative, and more steeped in art. My pen has been a scalpel which cuts through the outer skin, pushes the muscles, probes for the roots of things. Autobiography has lifted me above the daily grind to see my life emerge under a different light. As I write, I experienced moments of thrill, of deep pleasure, never experienced since I was a child. So always going back to the child. In 1997, during the last weeks of her sojourn at Duke University, Nawal watched a puppet show, written and performed by some of my students. She was excited to see herself as a puppet, debating with Thomas Merton, Simone Weil, and Mahatma Gandhi about the role of God in human lives. At a crucial moment, so these puppets are talking to each other, at a crucial moment from beneath the stage booms God's voice, telling them that he was sick of their quarrels, that he was resigning. To the students and ours, so my husband, Bruce Lawrence, and our amazement, Nawal was thunderstruck. She had never before heard God's voice, she exclaimed. It was a student underneath the table. During the following 4 days and nights, she wrote her play, God Resigns at the Summit Meeting, Allah Yastaqil fil Qimma, that summons prophets and women for a meeting with God. I, in fact, visited her on the third day. She was sitting on the floor, surrounded by papers. She had been writing night and day. She couldn't stop writing. So when Satan offers to resign, none of the prophets offers to replace him. So instead, God resigns. Theater allowed her to stage her angry refusal of religious pretexts to deprive women of their rights, rights that these religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, claim to guarantee. Although she said that she could not publish the play in Arabic, she did, of course, in 2008. She smuggled it into a bundle of her complete works that her publisher, Madbouli, had agreed to put out. He had no idea it was in there. So, of course, the publication of Allah Yastaqil created pandemonium. The Islamic University and Supreme Court of Al-Azhar accused her of apostasy, and prosecutors called for the destruction of all her books and initiated a lawsuit demanding the revocation of her Egyptian nationality. In 2008, that year, she defeated the case. This court case was not the first that the state and religious institutions mounted against her. Before, in 2001, she gave an interview in which she had called the kissing of the black stone of the Kaaba in Mecca during the Hajj a pagan act. Islamic scholars appointed an Islamist lawyer who demanded that as an apostate, she be divorced from her husband, Sharif Hatata. She defeated that case. And then in 2007, of course, she defeated the case against her when she demanded that mothers give their name to their children. So in late December 2010, under the aegis of the International AUSA, she convened a conference entitled Women and the 21st Century. And at that time, we didn't know, I mean, it was just a few weeks before Tahrir. We had no idea that there was a revolution around the corner. And of course, within 18 days, the people had toppled Mubarak from a throne he had prepared for his son. Many filmed and photographed the mass demonstrations that took place all over the country, but notably in the iconic Tahrir Square. Nawal published 2 books about the revolution. Her 2013 Thawrat al-Arabiya, Arab Revolutions, and a 2014 novel, Innahu ad-Dam, Indeed It's Blood. So Arab Revolutions, I think, has been translated into English. Innahu ad-Dam has not. Whereas the memoir celebrates the first heady days of Tahrir, the novel explores without romanticism the impoverished lives of a few participants. Reflecting on her experience during her country's revolution, الثورات العربية tracks the interaction of fear, anger, and strength. And then she talks about her father who had participated in the 19 revolution against the British, her own leading of a revolution in her school in 1946, and says that her participation in Tahrir is exactly what was going on in her life until then. So every morning, one or two men would come to pick her up, hilarious stories, sometimes on a motorbike, and take her to Tahrir. At night, late, she would return exhausted but elated to collapse into bed. She ridicules the thugs who rode into Tahrir on camel and horseback to disperse the crowds. And I couldn't find a picture of it, but I'm sure some of you have seen them, where she's looking up at one of the riders on a camelback and saying, "Don't be ridiculous." Empowered by childhood memories of courage, anger, and fearlessness, she fights them with words and her child's anger that pushes the adult to break the wall of fear. And as you know, that wall of fear comes up again and again in writings about the Arab Spring. So she writes about that in the memoir, but in the Huddam, indeed it is Blood, a dark novel, she keeps circling back to prison. One of the two main characters were prisoners together in Qanatir. One was upper middle class, the other was working class. So in prison they were together, but after prison, the upper middle class woman employs her prison mate as her maid. So this novel keeps circling back to prison with its smells, sounds, and eerie resemblance to life outside. It spares none of the opportunists like the morgue doctors who take bribes for autopsies and the nurses who sell unclaimed cadavers to medical students. And at the end of the day, they share the spoils. It's pretty radical. Then there are the Islamists who prowl the square looking for opportunities to harass secular demonstrators. What are we to make of the radical contrast between the memoir, Thawrat al-Arabiya, and the novel, In the Huddam? Is Nawal presenting a chronological assessment of the fate of the revolution? Did she meet people at a later stage of Tahrir who shook her faith in the early days of the revolution? Or should we read the two texts together without trying to resolve their apparent contradictions? Of course, that's what I'm suggesting we do. Is this not how real revolutions evolve, with their spectacular highs and desperate lows? In a June 19th, 2014 email to me, she wrote, "The revolutions are all aborted, including Occupy Wall Street, but creativity is never aborted. And that's why we write. God wrote his books." Another piece of heresy. God wrote his books for the same reason. Underlying such pessimism of the will, however, is the optimism of the mind. The revolution is ongoing. Even if underground, it will return. So let me conclude. Literary form has played an important role in Nawal's feminist trajectory. Circular narratives, repetitions, and oniric, dreamy landscapes through which women wander in search of safety from predatory men reappear in many of her stories. She sometimes creates spontaneous and passionate texts, responding to a need to write and communicate immediately what she is examining in the clinic or in scripture, or in the streets. Connecting the dots between sex, class, gender, and politics informs her life. She has never veered from a post-colonial feminist multiple critique that remains vigilant toward her many readers and their sensitivities, and responds to their objections. Keenly conscious of the critique of feminism as an arm of Western imperialism, she always links her criticism of homegrown misogyny with imperial ambitions in the region. She has not wavered from her central message. The battle against colonialism, class prejudice, and patriarchy, both secular and religious, are so intertwined that if one is emphasized over the other, the entire struggle will fail. Intolerant of those who give up, Nawal declared shortly before her 80th birthday, and I quote, "I'm becoming more radical with age. I've noticed that writers, when they're old, become milder. But for me, it's the opposite. Age makes me more angry." So full has her life been that in addition to dozens of novels, she has published numerous memoirs and autobiographies. Each portrays the challenges, failures, and successes that trace a thread through almost 90 years of struggle to change the way in which we all interact with each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. All right. I think we have only a few minutes. If you have any question that you would like to pose, any clarification that you would like the professor to make?
Hello.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Rafika Zahruni. I just presented. So
sorry, just 1 minute. I'd like to get out of this so I can see who's speaking. So how do I do that? Okay, good. So
hello?
Yes. Now, Dr. Rafika Zahruni.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cooke, for your presentation. I think there's a statement that I'd like you to clarify what it is and maybe what's your take on it, because I also heard Dr. Purr mentioned that earlier today. This is what was said by author Nawal Saadawi. You quoted, I think, women's bodies are not shameful until they are veiled, right? So I find this citation extremely disconcerting. For right, I mean, I have been living for the Muslim world for the last 40 years, but out of those 40 years, 9 years were in the United States, and this was not in the United States when people are veiled or unveiled, or they wear whatever they want or they don't wear, it's not a problem. So in here, why should it become a problem in the Arab world or in the Muslim world? I mean, unless women are obligated to wear the veil, then I would consider that as a deprivation of rights. But if not, I really don't understand how women's body are not shameful until they are veiled. I cannot grasp her statement. Can you?
Yes, of course.
Clarify. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful question, and let me quickly say I am so sorry that if I have been repeating what was said before. As you may know, okay. You started the conference shortly after I went to bed. So I think your conference started at 3 in the morning.
Right.
So maybe I should have stayed up. So Yeah, it's very controversial. And her attitude to the veil has been criticized again and again. And I have heard her, and for those of you who know Nawal quite well, there are times that she says things that seem unnecessarily painful. And that is to, I'll give you just one example. I think it was about 6 years ago, I organized a conference at Duke, and she participated. There was a big audience, as always, and there were a lot of veiled women. Women, particularly Black women, some from the Nation of Islam, some from, Sunni Islam, which is a term for American Islam, a form of American Islam. And some of them were quite gorgeous. They're beautifully tied, beautiful material. And so one woman asked exactly your question, a question that she has been asked probably 200 times, if not more. and she said, this is not oppressive to me. And particularly after 2001, so after, the 9/11, many Muslim women, ironically, you'd have thought maybe that they would not want to become more obvious as Muslims, in solidarity with each other, started to wear the veil. So you were in America for 9 years. If it was during that period, you would have seen that there were many women many Muslim women who then put on the veil. So Jamila, she was a student of mine. Jamila stood up and she said, look at me. This is my choice. I am empowered by it. And Nawal said, okay, look at you. You're drawing attention to your femininity. You're drawing attention to your sexuality because you're saying, look how beautiful I am, veiled the way I am. Your veil is exactly the same. And then she would turn to me because I guess I was always wearing makeup and high heels. It's like Miriam's makeup and her high heels. So, if you wear clothes that are loose trousers, a loose top, I guess if you dress like the Chinese during Mao's time, then your body, you're not drawing attention to your body as something sexual that needs to be covered. And for her, the niqab is the same as Jamila's beautiful Nation of Islam veiling, and as terrible as my makeup and high heels. Does that answer?
Yes, it does. I mean, okay. The niqab is a whole other issue because it hides identity. In Tunisia, it's forbidden here, niqab, in institutes, in schools, everywhere. But thank you very much.
Oh, in Tunisia, of course, Bourguiba forbade the hijab, not just the niqab, right?
Right. Not a niqab. It was not a niqab is something very recent.
No,
so Bourguiba didn't. Yeah, it wasn't by law that he forbid people to wear it or anything, but he encouraged women to look more secular and more modern. That's what he did.
Exactly.
And the irony, Dr. Cooke, is that for example, if we take the case of Tunisia under Ben Ali's time, which is from 87 to 2011, the police, in a police state system under Ben Ali, the police banned the van, and women were obligated not to wear it, and they suffered in prisons. So we must have many narratives, like Tijani talked about the narratives that are, composed in prison, and so it's all contradictory and very controversial, like you said. It's her personal view. I respect, but I don't buy it. I'm sorry. I'm not veiled, but I don't see why wouldn't we respect people's freedom of wearing whatever it is,
Oh, there's no need for you to agree with Nawal. By the way, this is what I have been saying today is not my opinion, right?
Yes.
I've been giving you my read of Nawal over the, oh my God, how many years have I known her? 40 years, 35 years. The 40 years of your life, I've known Nawal. But no, I radically disagree with her over many things. But I respect her tenacity in holding on to her fight. That, as I say, is a fight that is conducted on multiple levels, and that's where in 2001, when Kamal was giving a list of my books in Women Claim Islam, I elaborate. The entire book is about multiple critiques. So that is the ways in which I think women in particular, not just Muslim women, I think we do it all the time, so as to not to fall into contradiction.
Right.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Miriam.
Can I have more?
May I ask a question?
Okay. The problem is that we're really running out of time, and I must apologize to the next panel because we're really encroaching on their time. Can I suggest, first of all, can I suggest that Professor Miriam, can you join us tomorrow according to the schedule in the concluding? We have like some kind of concluding ceremonies, and during which we may actually take some decisions. We would like you to be with us.
What time?
And according to our schedule, tomorrow we're finishing, I'm talking about now London time, we're finishing at 5:30. So 5:30, we'll not finish it, the last panel. So we're starting the concluding ceremonies and farewell at 5:30. Let us say we have about 20-25 minutes to conclude and to take some decisions where we go from here. And it might delight you to know that we talked, and many of us talked today about promoting a call to recommend Nawal Saadawi for a Nobel, either in literature or for peace. So I think it's a great cause. We will also talk about where do we go from here and what we shall do with the papers, because we want this to be also published. All right. So thank you very much again. And even though we're really, really pressed for time, I did not wish to stop you because it was just beautiful what we were hearing. I must say and point out the beautiful human gesture as a human being, as a decent human being, you and your husband, who's a scholar also, the gesture you made towards Nawal when she was practically a fugitive, running away from the Islamists in Egypt who were calling for her life. And then you provided an opportunity for her not just to save her skin, but also to prosper and to teach and to develop her ideas. Absolutely wonderful, Miriam. I say this from the heart.
Thank you.
Let's give her a round of applause.
Kamal, please. Dr. Kamal, I want to send my greetings to Dr. Miriam Cooke. And
Is that Nawal?
To tell her that I have
I would like to speak.
Your book, it is the Descendant Syrian translated one. And it's one of my important references, actually, in several papers I did. Thank you for this beautiful
Where
book.
are you?
Yeah, this is
I
me.
want to see you.
Yeah, see the book, please.
This is Shahla Ujaili, not me. I want to speak,
Yeah.
but nobody's letting me speak.
So
My
it's,
name is
Okay,
Shahla.
no,
Shahla
just one
Lawjee.
second. Dr. Shahla, have you finished what you wanted to say?
Yeah, but I
Okay.
want Dr. Cooke to see the book, her
Okay.
book here.
oh, where are you? Why can't I see?
Yeah, I will.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let us
I can't control the screen, actually.
Okay. Okay. Let us give Dr. Ghali a chance to talk. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Kamal. Yes, Miriam, this is a wonderful opportunity to see you again. We miss you a lot here at AUS since you visited us, 10 years ago or so? The students still talk about you, yes. But I would really also love to thank you so much for shedding important focus on the fact that it is indeed, in my humble opinion, the genius of Nawal Saadawi, her ability to actually combine and intersect her scientific and field work, her theory, with her creativity. Something that many people have criticized and have seen as a weakness. I was so young when I actually was introduced to Nawal Saadawi, and I thought she was a genius. 30, 40, 50 years on, having read hundreds of other authors, I still think Nawal Saadawi is a genius, particularly for her ability and her insistence on actually writing in the way that she writes. You remember George Tarabishi, who wrote a devastating critique.
Yes.
And since then, many people were impacted by that, and many people continue without reading Nawal Saadawi and understanding what Nawal Saadawi is trying to do. They say, oh, she's not such a good writer. Oh, no, she shouldn't be writing. But what you did today is something that all people who write about writers, all critics, especially our critics in the region, should hear what you have said, so that they reconsider. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I have to.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nawar. And we thank again Miriam for a wonderful presentation. And please let me remind you, Miriam, that we still need to have this full paper, because we will include it in an edited collection. And of course, this applies to all of you. I will repeat this again tomorrow. Please make sure that you join us, Miriam, tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. London time. Okay.